Ladies and gentlemen, friends of MIT, welcome to the MIT ILP webinar on urban economic vibrancy. As you may know, the rapid development of urbanization trend has reshaped the global economy as the cities, enabling workers and firms to interact in close physical proximity, allowing specialization and nurturing entrepreneurship. So urbanization in Asia has generated more than 1/3 of the world's total GDP. So today I would like to introduce our speaker, Ms. Zhengzhen Tan. Zhengzhen Tan is a research scientist and a lecturer at the MIT Department of Urban Studies and Planning and MIT Center for Real Estate. She is also the executive director of Sustainable Urbanization Lab. Zhengzhen taught 3 graduate courses at both MIT School of Architecture and Planning and the Sloan School of Management, including Urban, Tech Venture, China's Growth, and Digital Cities. She directs the China Future City program, which initiated the Future City Innovation Connector. Zhengzhen's expertise is focused on transitioning urbanization, digital innovation, and the transformation in urban development industry. She's the author of Digital Tech in Urban Systems. Prior to joining MIT, Zhengzhen was the urban planner with extensive practice in both public and private sectors in Shanghai, Singapore, London, and Vancouver. Let me welcome Ms. Zhengzhen Tan.
Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today at the ILP webinar of Developing Asia New Cities, the Urban Economic Vibrancy. I'm Zhengzhen. I'm the research scientist and executive director of MIT Sustainable Urbanization China. So our theme today is the rapid urbanization in China. Urbanization in Asia. Urbanized Asia has become a global economic powerhouse. It generated 1/3 of the world's GDP. And one significant urbanization trend across Asia is the widespread prevalence of the new planned cities, where public and private sectors collaborate to generate growth engines. Let me pull up my PowerPoint. So this the new city, this new planned city has more concentrated in regions where public and private sectors have the power to assemble large areas of land for development, such as in Asia, the Gulf Coast state, the Middle East, and Africa. So this trend of building new cities, however, this new trend has been hotly debated. Opponents of the new cities criticize that developers seek only to buy green field land at lower price and then later sell luxury property at a much higher price, which give rise to the land speculation. And they also criticize that technology firms only care about selling their product while the smart city trend is hot. They also criticize local governments capture one-time windfalls in fiscal revenue by selling land to the highest bidder, and the politicians to stimulate construction booms that temporarily improve their political standing, no matter the actual utility of what they're building, and eventually lead to the many aptly called the ghost towns. And if some of you have watched the 2013 60 Minutes, there are a whole series about China's ghost town. And according to them, this is an entire city, all the building and the road, schools, hospital, that was empty except the people. And they say there's not a soul to be seen. Well, on the other hand, we also see proponents of the new cities as a choice to move out of the congested city core area and provide affordable space, higher quality of city life, and a vibrant economy. Professor Richard Pizer and Anne Foyce from Harvard University just recently published a new book on the new towns for the 21st century. They mention that most new towns are financial failure, but we see most successful new towns in Asia. So how they made it in why Asia cities was be able to make such a gigantic and financial risky undertake to a successful outcome. Yale professor, also former chairman of Morgan Stanley Asia, Stephen Roach, writes that China doubters are wrong about its ghost city. And Professor Roach has said that China's modernization is the greatest urbanization story the world has ever seen, and that these ghost town cities will soon become thriving metropolitan area. So that was in 2012 that he said that. And here, I want to show a picture of my hometown where I grew up in Shanghai. The Pudong area is a classic example of how an empty urban construction project in the late 1990s will become a fully occupied urban center, and the Pudong continue to thrive a sustained prosperity when it rises to as the global financial center. So Pudong today has a population of nearly 6 million people. I still remember that when I was in my teenagers, my grandma always say that people would rather get a bed in the Puxi instead of house in Pudong. However, by the time that I graduated from college, my classmate, Pudong was become one of the favorable area for settling down among my classmates because of its housing affordability, newer amenity, and most important of all, a more immigrant-friendly, open-minded community. Last year, my close colleague, Professor Si Zheng, and I have started a book project on Asia's new city. We want to contribute to this evolving debate of the new city trend in Asia and across the world. We study Asia because Asia relatively started its experiment earlier, and it has been 30 years. The 30 years we accumulated enough data, empirical evidence to give a full evaluation on the success and the failure of such a undertake. And we seek to understand from the perspective of economic vibrancy, which newly built cities in Asia were successful, and what are the key mechanisms of such success. We wanted to address questions about what those criticizing view of Asian new city does not consider. That is whether there are also ways in which the new planned city can create new broader economic and societal value through coordinated concentration by solving market failure, generating positive externality, unlocking innovation, and opening up new sectors. So among all those research questions, we feel one of the most relevant quest is how successful public-private partnership is necessary to produce such a desirable outcome for both public and private benefits. One may argue that new cities approach is just one of the many other alternative approach that a city can achieve economic development, and the public-private partnership is nice to have. However, we feel for national global scale systematic challenges that we are facing right now, such as climate change, environmental crisis, cybersecurity, and even now the current pandemic that we are in, a working public-private partnership is a must-have. So what we can learn from those Asia's political and business leader, how they were able to build a mechanism and execute this process to produce outcome. So we think that new cities lessons are influential far beyond the real estate development and the industry policy itself. And this tremendous opportunity will offer us valuable insights on the public-private partnership design and execution, and what's the challenge to align the government and private enterprise in multi-dimensions, and how can we align fill in the knowledge gap, so that knowledge gap between the business strategy versus public administration, so communication can go smoothly, and how can we break the cultural and the language barrier between the private and the public sector so that trust and rapport can be established in this and in this aspect. How can we learn from these past 30 years experiment from these Asia countries such as China, Korea, Malaysia, and India, etc. So we examine the performance of the new city with a particular focus on China, just purely given the huge volume and high intensity of the new cities that has boomed. China has the greatest urban population, and we also have accumulated enough research foundation for such to understand such a phenomenon. And we feel that the success failure of this government-led, top-down, proactive initiative, coupled with a bottom-up market forces, will have a long-lasting effect, not only in China's economy, but also beyond. So we think there are 4 knowledge pillars for the new cities making. Most of the current academic research is on the physical planning. As you can imagine, the new city provide a fantastic blank slate for the futuristic visionary architect to build a designed a future city. And so however, our angle is more from the economic development viewpoint. The reason is because one is relatively understudied, and also it's because it's easier to define based on the objective function of the new city planners. So in our book of the new cities, Asia's new city, we also talk about finance, as that's an important pillar to make sure that such a huge investment from the government, that they need to, the huge influx of money upfront, both in public investors and the city government will need to finance this project using various financial vehicles, including land sale, land finance, leasing, loans, and bonds. And failure to create a vibrant economy will means not generating enough cash flow to repay their heavy debts. So that there's one chapter we talk about these different vehicles for those and the pros and cons of different approach. However, for today's talk, I'm mainly focused on 2 parts. The first part is the economy, and the second part is the second perspective is from the technology advancement. So I will start first talk about my colleague, Professor Siqi Zheng, and her co-authors' research on the economic foundation perspective of the Asia's new city. So in Professor Siqi's past decades research, she studied more than 1,500 new towns that China has built since the 1990s, and through the study, they found that those industrial parks, which is an older version of the new city, generate significant positive productivity gain within the parks, as well as the spillover benefits to their local regions in about 70% of the cases. So firms in the vicinity of the parks tend to be more productive, and the residents tend to consume more, leading to the development of the new edge cities surrounding the initial industrial cores. And industrial parks are also associated with 20% increase in the municipal GDP 10 years after their launch. So these examples and those studies illustrated how centralized the planning and the public-private collaboration in both urban and industry development have the potential to trigger positive externalities and productivity gains that would not have otherwise arisen on their own. The new city we see is an evolution of the older industrial parks, as China and the Asian economy seeks to upgrading its industry and moving up the global value chain. So under the new agenda for the Asian mayors, the new city is shifting away from the monofunctional to a multifunctional and become a site for more than just a manufacturing production, but also for consumption. And it's become also a mixed use to fit a live, work, play lifestyle of the new labor force. As we move into the knowledge economy, those knowledge workers, they tend to demand cities that allow them to maintain a high quality of life while they raise their families in clean, consumer-friendly, and a vibrant neighborhood. So this shift in the intended economic function of the new city has demanded a new public and private planners to use a new model of city making, and the old model would not guarantee the people would come, this transformation also calls for a new conceptual framework that Professor Zheng and her co-authors was developed through this new city, through the second generation of the industrial park. So, and here we want to understand that the key role, they explain the key role of the coordination by starting with in the market force, that in planning and in the versus market spectrum, a new economic engine in the form of a new city would not materialize out of thin air, either if the market were left on its own device. So the non-market force would, such as the state power, would need to utilize the resource, which in the development economics, they term the framework of the place-based policy, as in contrast to the people-based policy. So in the place-based policy, they can bundle all this government subsidy to favor the desired outcome, and they can also have if the state has a higher degree of state, it can move and concentrate resources effectively and in a timely fashion, using the place-based policy. An analog of this mechanism is best illustrated through the coordination of the shopping mall. So being a mall producer, so in the case of the shopping mall, inside, in particular, small store would benefit from the presence of the large anchor stores that draw many customers, and yet no store would volunteer to coordinate all those stores in the mall setting, or take the risk of being the first store to move into an empty mall. So given the situation, the owner of the shopping mall is incentivized to solve the first mover problem. They are going to negotiate a subsidized rent to the large anchor store, and then later negotiate a better package for the smaller tenant. So the result is that the shopping mall's coordination, thanks to the coordination, the mall becomes more than the sum of its part. That is, the store enjoy more sales in the mall rather than if those sales were dispersed on its own. So the owner is compensated for their coordination service via a premium in the rent. So in order to build a new successful new city, one will also act as a new economic engine, would also need to align, would need to be a convergence of many elements: the state control of the non-market resources, which the government can use for the place-based policy, and most importantly, the coordination among the market sources. So the role of the central coordinator would provide a set of valuable service that either the state nor the individual market actor have access on its own. So they would call for a strong coordination, a coordinator-led model that in the shopping mall energy is have a delicate interplay with the favored policy and subsidy to generate the market mechanism for sustained success. So in the central coordination, so this is the framework developed by Professor Zhengzhen and Angie Zhou, that they delineate in order to create the new planned city economic outcome and the market logic and the coordination measure. They can solve the assembly with this central coordinator. They can solve the land assembly problem, build out foundational infrastructure, and provide incredible signals for the future prospects of the new city. And they can build out also prominent public goods such as the green space, the schools, setting this expectation and illustrating the long-term vision for the new city is critical, because the location for these firms and the knowledge worker, high-skilled knowledge worker, are major decisions involving large sunk cost and the long-term horizon. By recruiting productive terms, and meanwhile, by recruiting, the central coordinator will recruit productive firm from its prioritized sector, starting with this big tenant, anchor tenant, to reel in the smaller tenant on negotiation package move-in deal between many complementary entities at once to maximize this synergy. So two examples that they studied using this central coordination mechanism to understand how the mechanism work. So this central coordinator can either be a government entity or can be a private enterprise, depending on capability and expertise. So in the case of Guan, for example, that is the Guan New Industry City, which is planned through a public-private partnership between a weak government, but a strong private developer, China Fortune Land Development, CFLD, and the government can explicitly structure this arrangement into multi-decade contracts that tier the profit of the private planner to the long-term economic health and the growth of the new city. In the case of Zhengzhen, it shows that other scenario where the local or provincial or the national government can launch and finance coordination on its new cities. And in the book, in chapter 6, Dr. Colleen Cho and her co-authors talk about, in the case of Zhengzhou New District, the Economic Development Agency of the Zhengzhou government directly interfaced with desired firms and anchor entity to recruit them to its new city. And also in the case of Pangzhou, in a Korea case, we see that an expert committee formed by the provincial government was responsible for negotiating which IT, biotech, R&D entities would be brought in at the first phase. So that's my first part of the economic foundation of the new Asian New City practice. David would like to take some questions from the audience before I move into the second part.
Yes, I'd like to share some questions. Thank you, Professor Zhengzhen Tan. And one question that we have is on the PPP, a public-private framework that you discussed. Now, you have stakeholders and investors from both the public side and the private side, where the government provide incentivized land and various investment to promote development of the city, where private investors such as developers and investors develop commercial interest in those areas. Now, the government and the private investors have different return objectives, where the government may want to develop the local regions, attract talents, entrepreneurship, and etc., where the private investors may be more looking at the financial side with return on investments for that particular large project. Can you talk about how to manage such complex stakeholder interests when there's both public interest and the private interest involved?
Totally, that's a very good question. That gap is very obvious. For the private sector, they want low-hanging fruit because all they care about is to get the cash flow in a shorter horizon as soon as possible. While the government, when they phase out their new city plan. They are more looking for the, the signature project, like the landscape, the landmark project, which not necessarily generate immediate cash flow. So here, I think that the government and the private entity really need to align the interest of in the median, work out a trade-off or compromise model in the short term, medium term, and the long term, and they need to be in constant negotiation and the communication to work out this arrangement. So among these interaction between the private enterprise and the government, although they speak totally different languages, so the independent interest really will bring them together. So I won't have time to go into the detail. And in our case study of both Zhengdong and the Guan, it's a 10 years undertake, and has been over 20 years that achieve its like prosperity as planned. Well, in Zhengdong's case, like 10 years out is built, it was criticized in the 60 Minutes about the ghost town. So the process is involve thousands of agents and actors to coordinate that. And I would suggest, if you are interested more about the detail, maybe you can read our books, and in our case study chapter, we lay out the detailed the talks and the meetings arrangement, and also the way how they organize a 10 years, a decade long engagement.
Thank you. Second question maybe about as you were saying, aligning the interests of the government and the developers. Government provides significantly subsidized land, sometimes to the developers, and that certainly provide incentive for developer to take on a large investment over a long duration of time. And also because, so this is the positive side, but the other side may be because the land is purchased at such discount, that also provides developer to think about other incentives, maybe looking for intermediate exits or offloading such assets to someone else at a short-term profit. Mm-hmm. In your interaction with the city, how do they manage that? How do they make sure the developers are involved this for the long term, not just look for a short-term profit?
So this is most seen when we see in the Western new towns, like in the like US or American or European, that developer dump huge amount of properties in the recession area. And in China, there's because they have to go through the economic circle, when we see the horizon is 10 years, like to build out. So here the government support is a must-have in bearing the market risks and also weather the storms of these market conditions. And in terms of the how they can work closely to make sure that the whole horizon, I think that will, thanks to a peculiar political economic system of China. And of course, there are a lot of misallocation problems, such as the study of Professor Zheng mentioned, that there is a misallocation, or in some people, or in other term can be a bribe, or this corruption, government corruption. But our study demonstrated that 70% of the case, in the majority of the case, it's a positive sum game, not a zero sum, that the private and government align only personal interest. And actually this economic model was proved to be successful, not to mention the example of Shanghai, Pudong, and even Shenzhen. they are long gone, this the initial starting up page, and become a success on its own. So our goal is really to study why the success works, not to say that all these negative aspects can be avoided.
Thank you. Professor Zhengzhen Tan, I'm sure we'll have more questions follow on. Maybe you can continue with your presentation. We'll have more questions later.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I will, my second part, sorry, it's I probably only have 15 minutes left, is really talk about the technology component. So cities old and new, and since the early days of human civilization, city has depended on the advance in the technology of our urban infrastructure to enable economically, culturally, socially vibrant place. That include electric grid, street lighting, subway systems, smartphone, as well as the cellular network that power them. So each new generation of technology empowers our urban infrastructure to meet cities' growing concentrations of people and activity. So why people think that this generation of technology, what's so different about this generation of technology that people, media, and also thought leaders say we are entering a fourth transformational age of the city, thanks to the digital technology, in which bring by the stream of technology such as GIS, information communication technology, IoT, data analytic, artificial intelligence, machine learning. So why is this state of innovation transformation to the urban growth? Does the digital technology really offers, make our urban economic will achieve a higher vibrancy faster than the traditional urban infrastructure? So to understand this, I would like to differentiate two viewpoints of understanding the digital city. One is the city as in the older term, we say that is when we call city is we are referring to the urban information system, like the housing, the transport that enable a clustering of the activities and make people live together and mixed use. So this is city in terms of the service, and with the new reality of the economic development that I think if you attend all the previous ILP seminars, there's a huge discourse about the digital economy that is with the rise of the gig economy, the breakdown of the traditional innovation ecosystem that is based on the big corporation to a more regional city-based economic, and city become the most relevant economic unit. And the city is competing with each other for the quality of life so that they can attract business and the talents to the city. And this will form a positive reinforcement to make the city even a more desirable social, political, economic performance, such as the livable city, the responsive city operation, and more efficient city management. So here in the economic terms, we say the city as economic unit, the digital city become economic unit for the competition that we, when we move around the old economic engine that is manufacturing based to economic engine that is innovation and the knowledge based. So that's the city in the economic terms. And here, actually today, we are more focused on the city in terms of the service, which is its infrastructure, right? Or this system, how it enable the place. And talking about this trend, I have to borrow a term that is very popular in the business literature, is the digital transformation. If you understand the city as economic unit and as the infrastructure, which has a public benefits and a private incentive, it's like a city going through the digital transformation, although the term is always used for in organization part. But so when we use this framework to understand, then we can see the smart city trend, which started more than 10 years ago by ICT vendor like IBM and Cisco, they started as a market terminology to sell the digital the digital product to the city government. And later, the smart city movement realized that they are going to provide social value, not just social value, but also business value. And so that the digital transformation is can be delivered, not just a technology deployment, but also achieve a balanced social value and the business value. So the research also suggested that the next generation of 5G wireless network infrastructure, for example, can transform the local economy. With 5G, smart city solution applied to manage vehicle traffic and electric grid would produce more than 160 billion US dollar in benefits and savings. So, and here we see the new entrance into the new city arena. It used to be in the Asia city, we used to see a city government, and also the private sector is more like a real estate conglomerate. Now, more and more, we start to see the technology firm enter into this sphere. For example, Alibaba, the world biggest among the 10 of the world most tech firm, they all have their smart city initiative on the play. Alibaba, among them, launched City Brain project more than 10 years ago, and it has happened to connect the city traffic. It started with connecting a city traffic lights to solve the traffic congestion, which caused a huge cost for the economic development of the city. And in 2018, the Malaysia adopted Alibaba Smart City technology and will further use, starting from the traffic control to the public safety and the energy utility, and continue to unlock the potential of this data and also automation. So although most of the current smart city was deployed in the existing city, we start to see around 3 years ago, in 2017, we see a new trend in emerging new planned city across the world that was designing the digital technology at the same time with the physical building. Among them, we see it across the globe, not just in Asia cities, but also we see in North America. Google Sidewalk Labs Toronto Waterfront Project, for example, and also in Netherlands, the Brainport Innovation Smart District, although at a much smaller scale, but the essence and also the idea behind this innovation district is very similar to the new planned city, which is to solve the big city problems like affordability and the deteriorating environment for quality of living, and to create more innovation and attract more young entrepreneurs to create a new growth engine. Of course, in Asia, we see like in Xiong'an and also Korea, Songdao, that the city was built simultaneously, that the digital technology was built simultaneously with the physical change. Here, I want to mention like one of the observation that we see that although the timeline is very short, only 3 years, we won't have enough data and empirical information to really judge the success and failure of this digital city that was built in simultaneous with the physical city. But we feel some of, as you know, our study of the Guan new city and the Zhengdong other new city has more than 20 years empirical information. But this research is really to lay a future research agenda to really understand what is the added complexity and also needs to make such a endeavor or work. So in the case of the signature poster child of the digital city vision, we see 2 months ago, the Google actually announced that they're going to quit the Toronto Waterfront project. And the reason given by the CEO is that the financial financial viability, that it just couldn't work. There are major reasons claimed by the Sidewalk Lab. Of course, one is the COVID-19 outbreak and the economic recess, political wrangling, and the pushback really from the citizens. And we also compile all the reasons and the media from like the reasons for their failure in this experiment. Also include that. So our preliminarily thinking is that these take the lessons for the Google's Toronto waterfront. We start to see the importance of the working public-private partnership is just indispensable. Google is the world's most innovative company, so it won't lack any capability for innovation. And even when they launch this, they have they think this will provide a hotbed for the innovation and taking an integrated approach towards a more inclusive, a more affordable, and a more resilient future city. However, even that they couldn't be able to deliver, to execute such a vision due to the lack of the PPP. And imagine the the upfront spending that would have required for such an undertake is just way beyond for the world's biggest tech firm. Even a firm like a Google has a really deep pocket. It just wouldn't possible without a working public partnership. So on the other side, we would look into the Xiong'an. Xiong'an is launched at the same year as the Toronto waterfront, and that's demonstrated. Also, we feel that's demonstrated a digital city version in which the urban system are not based on a single system framework as seen in the architectural design of most smart city. It's not just a project-based approach, but instead it will provide a test bed, an experiment for both place-based policy and also the market innovation ecosystem. So here what we see, because we feel the digital transformation of our city would require city to deal with better with change overall, not just keep building the IT project that will create more data and service solo. So to realize this human-centered vision for society, including values such as livability, sustainability, and justice, a user-centric strategic transformation requires a city administration's organizational change, and as well as implementing the digital technology. So here, we would, from what Xiong'an has been doing in the past 3 years, and also I want to mention that the Toronto waterfront is about 3 kilometers, and the Xiong'an, the first phase of Xiong'an is more than 10 times the size of Toronto waterfront. That's 100 square kilometers. So under such a scale and intensity, we see that the new city administration has adopting a brand new approach in both public-private partnership and also the overall systematic design to enable such a vision. So we would summarize its current say in 3 aspects. So here is the picture of the Xiong'an railway station, and this is the first phase, the starting phase of the first phase of the Xiong'an, that they set up the public service bureau and experimenting a lot of the 5G deployment and also the autonomous vehicle public transit. And here we want to summarize in the short 3 years what they have done and done differently than a traditional physical new city is that first is the institutional organization. Comparing to the traditional public service in the water, sewage, waste, and all dysfunctional section, Xiong'an was set up a public service bureau aims to break the functional silo and integrate planning, construction, and governance of different infrastructure departments to enable a user-centric approach to the services. And second is the data governance and the infrastructure. How can they make sure that the legal framework was provided to ensure a safe and a favorable data framework, as well as building the data infrastructure? So that also closely related to the innovation ecosystem, because the past decades practice of China's smart city has has taught them that without a valid business model that we call the market mechanism could not sustain. Although the government has a strong will, has all the favorable subsidy, but without a market force, the sustained growth cannot be achieved. So in Xiong'an's case, they have been working to establish this innovation ecosystem with overall design for the government, for the data legal framework. So here that we see the city government is act as an ecosystem builder, the planner, the central coordinator to bring together the expertise of these tech firms in the digital technology, as well as the urban development and administration expertise from the traditional city developer, like the real estate the conglomerates. And another aspect in achieving this sustained business model is that we also see what the Sidewalk Lab has been doing is that because Google as a private-led New City initiative, they're very savvy in building a working business model, and which we see some commonality between Xiong'an and the Toronto waterfront. That is that the digital transformation has to happen in all three layers. The traditional, the first generation of the smart city was heavily focused on the city subsidized infrastructure, which is very hard for the financial sustainability. And a lot of efforts start to look into the community and the building level. The building level, they work closely with the smart building vendor and the developer. And the community level, Xiong'an is building a data block platform that will enable the municipal level of data will be shared in the community so that the commercial service, that service for profit can be generated was be able to generate future cash flow for the initial investment at the municipality level. My final takeaway for my presentation is that that China, the first is finance related, which I didn't really spend much time today to talk about, is China is shifting away from a land-based financing to a project financing. So to enable a more close, intimate dance between the market force and the non-market resources. And its crucial role for the central coordinate to evaluate the development project and draw a roadmap for the future development. It can be a private enterprise, can also be a public-led, or sometimes in some cases we see public entity, they hire a private service firm which has the expertise to lead this long-term and medium-term implementation of the firm. And besides this coordination, it's very important to build a cultural bridge so that they can willing to talk to each other. And in this case, there are further study will need to be, we start to see further study in the Asia and the North America that besides the expertise knowledge part, the cultural alignment would be also very important between the public and the private sector. As we see in the COVID-19 outbreak, the culture really play a big role besides the technology deployment in all when we see different nations to come out with this plan to cope with this crisis, public health privacies. And also in the digital part, we see that that the city as a coordinator role and the container role would need to totally design the whole digital city vision in the institution, in its legal framework, and also the new ecosystem design to enable the new business model. And besides these three aspects, there are dimensional in the place, in the building level, the community level, the municipality level, that each the government entity have to establish the credibility to enable at different level to enable such a vision. That's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zhengzhen Tan. We have some more questions from the audience. One question is about the social political aspect of these projects, but with more inclination on the politics or the government side. The person is interested in the politics impact on the urbanization and whether that has a heavy impact or not. Could you talk about the government side or the political side of the impact on the urbanization?
China is a policy-driven market. Probably most people knows that. Our study is not really, the purpose of our study is not really to provide a prescription, because we know every economy is very different in the political system. But what we can learn from the, like in the Asian cases, or in some China's new cities cases, is how the government will be able to align this interest, right? There's a fine line between the personal interest, which may lead to corruption and misallocation, because they may favor their own personal political connection with the economic. So here, the market, that's why we feel the market mechanism is also as important, right? China, there is like research about the China state, very strong state-owned, but if you look at over 1,000 new towns built all over China and all over Asia, the market has a choice, right? It's not like you build a city, will come, people will come automatically. Although from the demand side, we have an advantage because China has another 350 people need to urbanize, but they have choices. They don't have to come to your new city. So here, the government also need to work very diligently, not just with the place-based policy. They can ensure a guarantee of success, like in the industrial park age. In the new economy, the digital economy, they have to work very closely with the market force, like this private firm, to make sure the growth is self-sustained and can generate a positive sum for both economic value and society value. So we didn't get time to talk too much about the society value, because that's another aspect, a huge aspect of the new city. But we feel through the quantitative and qualitative study of the economic development side that we can offer some insights about how this mechanism will work.
Thank you. Thank you. And about the digital transformation adoption by the cities, and do you see a trend forming in certain parts of the world? Are certain parts of the world more inclined to work on these projects than other parts, let's say?
For sure. I think here I have to say the developing country has definitely has an advantage for that, because that's also where the developing economy like China, India would be able to leapfrog the developing country, because they don't have much legacy system to deal with, and so for sure they are more tech bold in technology deployment, but again, the digital technology literature all told us tech is just a small part of the whole transformation, right? It's more about the data, the legal, our institutional redesign, right, at organization level, and that can be borrowed to the city level as well, the city government, the level. But it's more complicated than the digital transformation in the company level, because there's a public benefits that we need to ensure. Otherwise, that the public health, the crisis, we already start to see the public health crisis, like pandemic, climate change. So that's why we feel these lessons we learn will be so important, like to all the other scenario, like need a global, even cross-regional, cross-national collaboration. Right? How can we learn from this mechanism. How did they implement this plan, and make sure that the market mechanism and the policy mechanism can work in parallel, right? Just like the shopping mall owner, how can they work together to create such a synergy? It's extremely important.
Thank you. Another question from the audience is, what's your take on the intelligent community, basically sharing space and facilities in the future after this pandemic? I can think of companies like perhaps like WeWork and companies that allow us to share space and facilities, but after this pandemic.
Oh, you mean the projection of this sharing?
Yeah.
So I think there is a opportunity and a threat we see on the media, like a lot of this sharing tech firm was being hit very badly for this pandemic. But on the other hand, we also see winner in this like scenario, like the digital, it accelerated our digital thing. For example, this is the webinar that I feel that will accelerate the knowledge flow across the globe. Without pandemic, probably our talk won't be shared at such a wider global like audience.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions we have from the audience, and thank you so much. Oh, maybe I just see another one popping up. Okay, there's one more question. What is the this is a more general question. So what is the next most promising real estate sector to invest in Asia? This is more of a general question from the audience about what sector of real estate is promising to investors.
I think China is definitely shifting away from the residential model, and is entering into a city operation age. But it's important to notice that the speed of China's urbanization would maintain for the next 20 years, right? So China still need to enter into a new normal that was more sustainability conscious and of a new quality focused development instead of quantity and speed oriented urbanization model. And the digital technology play a huge part in that will be enable this social value and the business value synergizing. In terms of the specific sector to invest in, that there is probably would be another talk that we can organize in the like in the future. Industry logistic is definitely, like, so obviously everyone talk about it's a boom, right? Thanks to the e-commerce, everybody now shop online, and the commercial real estate has been suffering, like the office in the commercial real estate, in the office, apartment, and retail sector. We start to see and hotel hospitality sector, we start to see a tremendous shift of wealth in the next while, and there are some studies shows that that we are actually in the another of our future research is focused on the office building, like the health oriented the office building, which hopefully we can share with you in the near future. In that, we are going to talk about how this the health accelerated together with the digital technology, accelerated the whole industry, the value shift from asset to the service.
Thank you very much, Professor Tan. In the interest of time, we would like to close this webinar, and I invite all audience who have more questions to reach out to ILP. You may find our contact information at ilp.mit.edu. You may also find the recording of this session being posted in the next few days on our website. My name is David Zhu, You can find my email and contact information also on the IOP website. We will always be happy to connect you with the professors and the researchers at MIT to help you with your business. Please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you so much, Professor Tan, for a very informed and helpful session on the urban vibrancy. And we all learned a great deal. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Thank you, David.